Welcome back to another episode of BHAW Radio. We're at episode 71. I'm your host, Brian Rowan, with longtime host coming back, making a comeback, Jordan Tom. Welcome to the show.
What's up, everybody?
And our guest this week, this has been a long time coming, Doc C, Dr. Nate Zinsser. We wanted to have him on the show a long time ago, but we've held out. Because of his new book coming out. For the folks who don't know Doc C that well, Doc C is the director of West Point's performance psychology program. Some may not know, but the program is the nation's gold standard curriculum for teaching and training mental skills that underlie excellence in any human performance, confidence despite setbacks, concentration despite distractions, and composure under pressure. Doc Z has degrees from Hampshire College, Columbia University, and the University of Virginia. He is a leader in the applied sports psychology field and has been featured on numerous major news outlets, magazines, and publications. He authored the first sports psychology guidebook for youth sport participants, as well as a column in Sports Illustrated for Kids for 5 years. In addition to his work at West Point, he presents nationwide at universities, professional athletic teams, and business corporations. He has done a lot for the U.S. Army at large, with training centers across the country aimed at helping soldiers and veterans. On top of his long list of educational and professional accolades, Doc Z was a state champion in wrestling. And most recently, he's published a book called The Confident Mind. So flat out, Doc Z is the best of the best in his field, and we're excited to have him on the show. So welcome, Doc Z. Appreciate you hopping on.
Brian, Jordan, I am so juiced to be on this program with you guys. This recently released book of mine has forced me to do interviews for dozens and dozens of podcasts. I'm doing like 3 a day these days, but I got to tell you, this BHAW Radio podcast is the one I have been most pumped about because I get to hang out with Army wrestlers and people who love Army wrestling, and I happen to be one of those. So thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm just juiced to be here.
Love it. I love it. You know, these other podcast platforms, they didn't know that they were talking to a lean, mean wrestling state champ machine, the man, the myth, the legend. So we're pumped to have you.
And I'm just as pumped to be here.
Yeah, and anytime we're able to get Jordan back on the show too, this was Jordan stepped away a little bit from the podcasting side of the house. So it's great to have him back on this. And so I guess start things out. Tell us about, we'd love to hear about the book a little bit. And, kind of, I'm sure you probably have it memorized by now with all the podcasts you've done here every day, but, kind of give listeners, a little glimpse of that before we hop into, everything West Point and BHAW related.
Sure. This book is essentially a guidebook. It's a distillation of a lot of the years that I've spent doing sports psychology work for human performance. I explain a few things about what confidence is, what confidence isn't from a functional point of view. I give people ideas on a whole series of steps on how to grow your confidence in whatever business or sport or profession you're in. And I give some people guides on how to apply your confidence, how to make sure that you're bringing it out and using it whenever you need to. There's a chapter on how to review a performance and dredge out the important learning steps from it. And throughout, I've spiced it up with stories of Army wrestling and Army lacrosse and Army hockey and some of the professional work I've done with the Philadelphia Flyers and the New York Giants. I throw in some pretty important battlefield stories, because as proud as I am of having supported EIWA champs and national qualifiers at Army wrestling, I'm really, really proud of the guys who have distinguished themselves, overseas during their combat deployments. So I'm hoping this book will give people a real in-depth understanding of how to become a better and better and better version of themselves.
That's always super important. I'm really excited. It's going to be waiting at my doorstep when I get back from this little trip tomorrow. So I can't wait to start reading.
I hope you like it. And if you like it, please send up a review to Amazon. That'll just help. That'll just help the war effort.
Yeah, I ordered it on Amazon, so like everybody does these days with everything, I feel like, but
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I'm sure that being a published author is a long road to publication. As much as I know about wrestling, and it's been my entire life, I can't imagine writing more than 5 pages about the sport of wrestling. So writing an entire book is a daunting task.
Yes, yeah, JT, it was a daunting task. It took me a good 5 years, you know.
Wow.
And I had a full-time job besides that. So this book was evenings, weekends, vacations. I really had to keep the hammer down. But I'm glad I did. I think the finished product's pretty damn good.
I love it. It's awesome.
So I guess, you talk about the book a lot, I'm sure, but you probably don't talk about your wrestling days as much.
No, indeed.
So we want to dive into that a little bit, kind of, I mean, you gravitate towards wrestling a lot, at least what I remember from the academy. I didn't really know how involved you were with other sports. It felt like you devoted so much time to wrestling. I felt like you were ours, but I think I was also just tunnel visions. But yeah, talk to us about like wrestling growing up and kind of get involved in the sport and what gravitated you towards it.
I think I started competitively wrestling, really not until like 7th grade. And I mean, we're talking a long time ago here, fellas. We're going back to like 1967. These are back in the days when if you were an athlete, you probably did 3 sports.
Mm-hmm.
You did a fall, a winter, and a spring sport. And that's the way it was for me. So the level of competitiveness and the level of, intensity for any given sport was a little less than it is today. I gravitated towards wrestling simply because, well, for 2 reasons. One, I knew it was going to keep me in great shape for football because I really wanted to be good at football. And then there came a point when I was in like 9th grade where I didn't see a great big future for myself with football, because, 130 pounds, 135 pounds, don't seem to be getting any bigger. I ain't going to be able to hang with those 190-pound, 10th graders, 11th graders. So wrestling was a wonderful opportunity for me to get into competition with somebody pretty much my own size. And boy, I never looked back. There was something about the intensity of the sport. There was something about the combative nature of the sport. I suppose I got some unresolved anger in me somewhere, and wrestling was great for that. As I've grown older, I really feel more and more and more special about wrestling. Okay. When I get a chance to get up in front of wrestlers, and a lot of times I've been able to talk to the young kids who attend the Army wrestling camps, I always tell them how special their sport is. This is an individual sport. It's just you. Nobody's going to block for you. Nobody's going to set a pick for you. If you're injured partway through your match, coach can't sub you out, put somebody else in there, and they can take over, like can happen in lacrosse or basketball or hockey or whatever. It's all you all the time. Either you're going to do it or it's not get done. I think you got to have a kind of special feel, special toughness in order to be that kind of individual athlete. And then even within other individual sports, wrestling is different. Tennis is an individual sport. You're hitting the ball back and forth against one person. That's an individual thing. Yeah, it's up to you. You're either going to win or you're going to lose. But wrestling is different. I mean, some guy's putting his hands on you, trying to make you do something you don't want to do. You're putting your hands on him, making him do something he don't want to do. That's personal. That's a whole lot more personal than hitting a tennis ball back and forth or, running a 400-meter sprint in a track meet. It's personal. It's physical. Oh, and by the way, it's physical, but you can't just haul off and break his nose. You gotta dominate them, but you got to dominate them carefully in a lot of ways. So, I really think you got to be a special kind of guy to excel in wrestling. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do it. I wrestled in New Jersey in the New Jersey Prep School League. We competed with the schools. I went to the Pingree School. We competed with Lawrenceville and Delbarton and Blair Academy. And the two proudest wrestling moments of my life are beating Blair Academy guys. Because they thought they were always, big deal, king of this, nationally ranked this and that. And even back, we're talking the early 70s. I graduated from high school in 1973. Even back in the early 70s, Blair was a powerhouse. They went on to become even more and more and more of a powerhouse, but they were a powerhouse then. And I won my Jersey Prep School title against Blair's #1 guy in Blair's gym. Place was packed with nothing but Blair fans. And I had the most memorable moment pretty much of my entire competitive life in the final period of the final round of that match. I had one of those magical experiences of being in the zone, and time slowed down, and my vision got clearer, and my mind became totally clear. And this is what's interesting. With 16 seconds left in that final period, I scored a takedown to win, but it was a takedown that I had hardly ever practiced. It was a high crotch from the left side, and I almost shot to the right side. But even though I had hardly ever practiced, I was in such a clear, perfect state of mind that it was the most picture perfect, technically perfect, best executed takedown of my entire career. Ironically, it was one that I had practiced very little. So it really taught me a lesson about, hey, maybe that state of mind I found was the real thing that made it possible. So with that experience, boy, I've stayed around wrestling ever since. I drilled with a Division III team when I was at Hampshire College in Western Massachusetts. I drilled with the Amherst College team. I went to Columbia for a few years. I used to go down to the New York Athletic Club and wrestle. And I've stayed practicing a Japanese karate system for the last 47 years, despite 6 knee surgeries, 2 hip replacements. So mixing it up and being combative is just part of who I am. And I guess that's why I love being around Army wrestlers so much, because they're pretty much the same kind of guys.
So was it that moment when you won this, when you were like clear mind in the state finals that you decided, okay, I want to be in sports psychology forever? Or when was that decision? Sure it was before then, or, you thought about it.
Well, it was funny. I had been attracted by, I had become very aware of the power of the mind earlier than my senior year at Pingree. I became aware of the power of the mind because the Pingree School had this reputation for being a powerhouse soccer program. And year after year, the soccer team was great. But it was the only team at the school that was great year after year. And again, this is when guys played like 2-3 sports. You could take half of this powerhouse soccer team, put those guys on the basketball court, and they were just sort of normal. Okay, they were not good. You could take half those guys from the soccer team, put them on the lacrosse field. Yeah, they weren't great. There was something about that soccer program. There was a mystique, an aura about it that every guy in the program bought into. They had a really powerful self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody else, no other team in the school had that. And it was really interesting. When I was in 9th grade, wrestling hard, believing that, hey, maybe our team can become good, because the team at Pingree up to that point had been pretty much we'll call them a doormat, And I remember sitting at lunch one day, and I was talking to some people in my class about, we got this guy in our class, we got this guy in our class, we got this guy. I think we could be really good in a couple of years. We just got to get some competition under our belts, get some seasoning. I think we can be really good. And a guy in my class, I won't mention his name, but I can see his face right now. He looked at me and said, "Nate, shut up. You're never going to be good. Guys at this school don't wrestle well. We're good at soccer. Sometimes we're good at swimming. Sometimes we're good at tennis. but we haven't been good in wrestling for a long time, and we never will be. And my jaw just dropped. I wondered, where did this guy get his crystal ball? And it was just further fact that what you believe about yourself tends to come true. And this guy had fallen into a collective belief that the wrestling team wasn't very good. And I'm proud to say that 2 years later, when I was a junior, the team had its first winning season in a long time. And in my senior year, we had another winning season. We had a couple of Jersey Prep state champs. The program's been legit ever since. And I don't know if it was so much the fact that we were just a bunch of stud athletes, as much as it was the fact that we refused to buy into this belief that, hey, we can't be good. We're not suited to be good, So that was really my first illumination into the power of the mind. And then when I had that magical takedown as a senior, that just kicked it over the edge. I knew I had to explore the role of the mind in human performance and see if I could help other guys discover that magical place where they're freaking awesome. Mm-hmm. And so, when I've worked with Army hockey players, lacrosse players, wrestlers, rugby players, riflemen, et cetera, I'm pretty much always starting with that place. Tell me about your most magical moments. Tell me about your state of mind when you're awesome. And how can we approach that? How can we make that more likely? How can we hit that in the zone flow experience a little more often?
I don't recall that background about your life. It's cool to understand the origin of what made Doc Z eventually. And I'm assuming, based on the timeline you're given, sports psychology was probably like a newer field.
Very much so, yeah.
To study it, yeah.
Yeah, when really the late 80s is when the field kind of formulated itself. It's when enough literature, enough science had been done, enough research had been done, and Olympic teams were just beginning to use, think of sports psychology as kind of an indispensable part of development. And I tell you, West Point was on the forefront of that. The Center for Enhanced Performance got started in the late 80s when a visionary colonel, a guy named Louis Choga, who was teaching in behavioral science and leadership, and he was also the head OR of the football team, he had this blinding flash of the obvious. He said, geez, all these intangibles are kind of important. Guys have to be able to focus. Guys have to learn how to stay relaxed. Everybody talks about that stuff, but how do you actually teach it? How do you actually train it? So he started doing some research in this newly emerging field of sports psychology, and he came up with some ideas, and he piloted them with the Army football team, 89 to 90 to 91, and the results were good. The coach at the time loved it. The superintendent at West Point loved it. Pete Dawkins, the famous alum, did promotional videos for this new little center. And at the end of 1991, Colonel Choga was seeing this little center that he had developed grow and grow and grow, and he wanted to make sure that he had a fully trained sports psychology PhD, a guy who was current with all the latest, and also had an applied background. So there was a national search put out. I threw my name in the hat because I was teaching at East Stroudsburg University at the time, and I thought this was a great opportunity to do sports psychology work at a premier institution. I threw my hat in the ring. I got the job. I started in summer of 1992, and I've never looked back.
How, I guess let's, before we dive into West Point, I'd like to hear about like kind of what your roles were leading up to that. Cause we're going to dive into it a little, a lot more. But I think back of all the time you spent at West Point and like how things have developed there, but I don't know anything about your background before that. So if you could dive into that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I graduated high school and I took sort of a vacation from traditional competitive sports. I got really excited about climbing big mountains. And so I spent the next few years really doing that. I climbed in Alaska. I did a couple first ascents with John Krakauer, the writer who a best-selling writer about Everest expedition. He's written a book about Pat Tillman, the soldier who, the NFL safety who retired from football to join the Army right after 9/11. I climbed big mountains in Alaska, Western Canada, Mount Rainier in the Pacific Northwest, the Grand Tetons, Yosemite National Park, and it was a real adventurous thing. And again, I was looking for those magical moments. I was really pushing my limits there. I was also studying martial arts at the time. I earned my first black belt in April of 1977. So I finished my undergraduate degree. I got a job as a teacher's aide. I did that for a year. Then I went to graduate school in Columbia, earned a master's degree. And then I was teaching and coaching wrestling at another small private school in New Jersey. And then I spent a couple years out in Western Canada as a performance consultant for a mining company, really looking at how to set targets and how to involve people and how to provide, the kinds of reinforcement that would get people to be, I wouldn't say pushing their standards, but working consistently and diligently and safely. And then I just felt this itch, man. I had to get back into sports psychology. And so I was really fortunate to find a doctoral program, a PhD program in the phys ed department at the University of Virginia, which was run by a guy named Bob Rotella, who is now very famous for mentoring professional golfers in sports psychology. I became his grad assistant, spent 3 years polishing off a dissertation and a doctoral degree, and then I went to East Stroudsburg for a fairly traditional teaching job, teaching courses, mentoring grad students, starting a research track. And when the opportunity to come to West Point presented itself as an opportunity really to work like daily with lots and lots and lots of performers, I couldn't pass that up. So I applied, persisted through the application process, and like I say, been there ever since, never looked back.
So you've been there since 1992, and I'm sure your role has developed over time from what it initially was in 1992 to now in 2022. What is the enhancements that have occurred over time in the Center for Enhanced Performance? What does that look like? How's it changed over time? And what do you really see your role looking like now and kind of moving into the future?
Well, my role initially, I was the subject matter expert. I was the smart guy. There were a trio of young captains, and there were 8 limited earnings assistant coaches who were sort of part-time trainers. This was when the whole coaching structure and the athletic department was very, very different than it is now. But I was the guy who had to write out curriculum. This is how we begin a conversation about sports psychology. These are the points that we have to hit when we're doing our confidence lessons, our concentration lessons, our stress management lessons. Because these young captains who had been brought in really didn't have anywhere near the formal training in the field that I had. I was sort of the in-house subject matter expert, as well as the point person for lacrosse and tennis and volleyball and gymnastics. One of the young captains when I first started was an academy grad, a former Army wrestler, so he was the point person for wrestling before me. As the years went by, the sort of administrative and personnel structure of the Center for Enhanced Performance changed. Those 8 part-time positions became 4 full-time positions, and we were actually able to hire people who had master's degree in sports psychology, had a little more experience in the field. So I had to do less formal sort of curriculum development, but a lot of personal mentoring so that they could be really good going out to work, say, with football or to work with, track, et cetera, et cetera. So these days, I am doing the administrative supervision for a team of sports psych pros. I've got 3 really incredible women that work in the CEP. One swam the English Channel this summer. 20 hours in the water, you know, and you can't take a break and cling on the side of the boat or you're disqualified. So she is a world-class open water endurance swimmer. There's another woman who has done a series of week-long mindfulness meditation retreats where you have to be silent for 7 days. Yeah. Jordan is shaking his head going, are you kidding me?
Not gonna happen.
Not going to happen.
For 7 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, most of us can't shut up for 7 minutes. But that really teaches you something about self-control. And there's another wonderful woman on, that I supervised. She has parachuted into forest fires with the Arizona Hot Shot firefighting team. She has walked barefoot over beds of hot coals without burning her feet. So all these people really have great things to share with cadets about persistence, about self-control, about getting yourself through things that you think might literally kill you by having the right mindset. And so a lot of my work is just getting these people the resources they need and removing obstacles to them, working with cadets. We are teaching a 10-lesson sort of mini sports psych course. We're teaching a 40-lesson 3-credit BSNL 300 level course. We're doing workshops for people who are struggling with survival swimming. So the program has really evolved. And throughout the years from about 1999 through 2010, we were very busy assisting the big Army to develop its own mental skills, mental toughness curriculum, which is now available. Now you can find it in the Army's Ready and Resilient Directorate. Prior to that, you would find it in the Comprehensive Soldier and Family Fitness units that are in posts around the country. So I'm real proud that some of the stuff that I wrote and developed for West Point, in the early 90s, has now found its way to I think there's 27 centers at different posts around the country, Korea, Germany, Italy. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, the span is definitely far and wide. And I guess I'm curious, how many other universities out there, right, have something like a Center for Enhanced Performance or something that is available to their athletes, that is providing the service that you are to the cadet athletes?
Well, over the last 10 years, a lot of university athletic departments have hired a Doc Z type guy. But the only place that I know that has a center for sports psychology training, the only other place that's got anything similar to West Point is the Img Academy in Bradenton, Florida. And I've known some of the people who work there. They have developed over the last 10 years a curriculum and a group of mental toughness trainers, kind of like what we have at West Point. Even the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy, they've got really like one person who does part-time performance-related sports psychology work, and the other time that person has to work in the more sort of traditional mental health counseling role. I think the only other place that's at all comparable would be the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, where again, you have a team of sports psychologists who are assigned to various national and Olympic teams.
Yeah.
But I tell you, West Point is just so far ahead of the power curve on this. It's not funny. I
ask because it's my shameless plug for recruits to listen to the episode, right? to know that what they're getting at their fingertips is equivalent to a Olympian's experience as far as sports psychology. So it's a big deal, right? And it's something that West Point's been committed to since early 80s. So you can imagine how far ahead of the game we are, to your point, now in 2022, haven't been doing it that long. But I know the next thing we want to jump into is...
before we do that, I have
All right, go ahead.
One specific kind of off, it's not off topic, but I just kind of thought of it. West Point in the mid 90s kind of changed their leadership model to where it was like less of getting hazed and develop the 4-class system. Were you involved, or how did that kind of, I feel like the Center for Enhanced Performance and Mindset, kind of, all encompasses that leadership model. Were you involved in any of that, or did you notice any trends and differences by how the treatment of cadets differed and based on the leadership model back then?
Yeah, really interesting question, Brian. I was not formally involved in any decisions to move the educational model of West Point from an attrition model to a developmental model, okay? Where we would actually work to develop better leaders as opposed to just bring in a bunch of people, haze the shit out of them. If they could handle it and stick it out through 47 months, then they graduated as leaders. I wasn't involved in the actual decision to change that, but I think the fact that we were working at this level to develop understandings of how to use the mind better, I think that was kind of an indication that maybe the rest of the academy paid attention to and said, maybe we don't need to spend, well, we're still going to spend a lot of time searching for talent, but we don't necessarily have to automatically separate somebody if they don't pass survival swimming on the first go, or if they struggle with chemistry, physics, whatever. We're going to give them more opportunities to develop the potential that we see in them. So that took place, like you say, throughout the 90s. One other development that's really clear is that West Point is now trying to, it has now created a corps of cadets that is culturally diverse so as to reflect the cultural diversity throughout the Army. Mm-hmm. So we have more African-American cadets. We have more cadets from, different backgrounds. We're more diverse as a corps. And I think that's absolutely the right move to make because we serve a nation of incredible diversity.
Definitely an interesting concept. I didn't even think to go that way, but I am thankful as a man that struggled with both physics and chemistry that they made that decision. So
yeah, they didn't kick you out after that 1D, huh, Jordan?
Well, there was more than one, but yeah. All right, we want to hear some stuff regarding BHAW specifically. We had James Rafferty on way in the beginning of the early days, and we've heard it from multiple perspectives over different episodes. But always been curious to hear, what were some of those backdoor conversations that were taking place potentially between Coach Heskett and yourself as far as, the vision for the team and wanting to do this team building exercise. How did that come about? What was your recollection of just the story of the origination of BHAW? And what is the team building psychology perspective of it, right? That you create something like that and then it sticks around for now, 13 years.
Yeah. The BHAW story, I started out very similar to some other team building adventures that I've been on, but there has not been a team building adventure that's had the particular staying power that BHAW has. I was around for the very start. And the reason why BHAW came about was because Mike Gorman, now Captain Mike Gorman, teaching in our physical education department.
Major Mike Gorman, just for clarity.
Oh, he just got promoted?
Yeah.
Good for him. All right. I missed the promotion ceremony. I'll have to do some push-ups. Cadet Gorman came into my office. I think he was either one of our 84 pounders or 97 pounders back in those days. He came into my office and he said, I think we're a good team, but we seem to lack an identity, a sort of collective self. And I said, okay, well, let's see what we can do about that. So we went to Coach Heskett and said, can we spend a little time getting the wrestlers' ideas about what makes for a great team and see if we can come up with a theme or a thread or a unifying concept that guys could get excited about. And Coach Heskett said, yeah, sure. Okay. So one afternoon, I was in the far corner of the wrestling room with a flip chart and a bunch of markers, and the whole team was sitting on the mat, and we just started to explore. I asked everybody on the team, think about the best team you've ever been on. What did that team accomplish? And what was the trait that made it special? And I had every guy think about that. And then we grouped guys in groups of like 5 and 6, and they all told the story of their great team to that group. And that group of 5 and 6, they listened to what those stories, and they listened to each guy describe a trait that had made that team great. And then the task was for that little group of 5 to come up with the best trait of the ones that they had heard that would be best for Army wrestling this year. And so through that process, we had all these ideas come up. And what boiled down were the notions of, you got to be a brotherhood. You got to have big heart, something that just attracts people. And you got to have an attitude of dominance. And just, God, we all want to be warriors. Mm-hmm. So those 4 words came up. And then we talked further about, okay, well, what does brotherhood look like in action? What does it mean for there to be heart? What is precisely an indicator or 3 of these attitudes? So we basically drew up a declaration. This is who we are. We are a brotherhood of warriors with heart and attitude. And if you go into the team room today, there are 4 large posters describing BHAW. And Coach Heskett thought it was great. Guys bought into it. And as from 2009 to 10 to 11 to 12, right on through, everybody seemed to love that idea. When Kevin Ward, took over the wrestling program after, from Joe Heskett, he saw this BHAW thing and he said, well, this is wonderful. This is something that excites guys, draws people together. So now you walk into the wrestling room and you see Brotherhood, Heart, Attitude, Warrior in letters 4 feet high, printed on the vertical mats, on the walls. And like I said before, I've done this same kind of team building exercise for lots of teams, but typically it runs out of steam after 3-4 years. But, BHAW is going on 12+ years. And everybody still gets fired up about it. Guys still show me their BHAW tattoos, during grad week. I've probably got 6 photos of different guys showing off their BHAW tattoo right there on the inside of their bicep. I won't ask you where you guys put yours. It's probably embarrassing.
I still haven't got mine yet. We've been talking about
we'll get busy, Rowan. I really give Mike Gorman the credit for kickstarting the idea. All I did was help gather ideas that were already seated in the brains of the wrestlers of that team. And I just put a little wordsmithing so that it became this document. And I've shown the BHAW document to several people. I showed it to the head coach of an NFL team a few years ago, and he said, wow, that's impressive. We got to do that on our team. So everybody who's participated in Army wrestling since 2009, I think has been drawn in a little bit by, here's something that we can all rally around. We want to be a brotherhood. Everybody wants to belong to something powerful, and the idea of just having this heart and this attitude and being this team of warriors, I think that's pretty damn attractive. The proof is in the pudding. Nobody has said, hey, BHAW, who cares? Yesterday in practice, Coach starts off practice with a few administrative comments, and he says, all right, let's get going. BHAW on 3, 1, 2, 3, BHAW. And that's how practice starts. And at the end of practice, an hour and a half, 2 hours later, we're still coming together. We're putting our hands in the middle. And, captain will call out, okay, Mark Montgomery, call it out. And he goes, BHAW on 3, 1, 2, 3. And everybody BHAWs. It's as powerful today as it was 10, 12 years ago.
Is there something particular about, what we did or how we did it that has allowed it to stick around that long? I mean, you kind of hinted that it's one of the few exercises he's done that's lasted, this long. And what's interesting to me is we've had all these other older grads on there far prior to 2009. And what's interesting is when we describe to them what BHAW is, or when we ask them about their first experience of having it described to them, they all have a strong connection to BHAW. So I don't know if it was just our ability to describe what being a part of the Army wrestling program means, that it just was so accurate and so descriptive to what even folks way long prior to that it stuck around. I don't know if that's a piece of it. I'm sure you probably have a different perspective.
No, I think that's very much it. I think you hit it, JT. BHAW is something that guys can relate to right now, and even guys who didn't have it can sense, oh, wow, that's powerful. I think it really touches on things that A, guys want, and B, things that wrestlers want. We want a brotherhood. We want to have each other's back. We want to see this black swarm coming together when any one of us, comes off the mat after a dual meet or a tournament bout. I think it's lasted so long because it really speaks to something deep that people want, a brotherhood. And it's lasted so long because it really helps bring out the kind of physicality, the kind of toughness that you got to have if you're going to be a successful wrestler. You want to have that heart, you got to reach down, you got to have that attitude of persistence and dominance, and you really got to feel like a warrior, like you're going out there to do battle, and you're going to hold your head high, and you're going to stride out there on that mat like you own it. And that's the way we try to do our business every day.
Mm-hmm.
Did you?
I hope that gives you some kind of background.
Yeah, and we've talked, I think, in depth about this with several people on the show, and it seems like the class of like 2014 and 2015, they really like owned it to where, like, when you mentioned, these things go away after like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It seems like talking to those folks, like the class of 14 and 15, really owned it when it may have not gone away, but it may have not been what it is today if it wasn't for those classes.
Yeah, Joe Heskett did something very interesting right around that time period. He actually had the entire BHAW declaration, the full text, painted on the wall of the wrestling room. So it was there in front of you, not just the big block letters, but the actual details. And I remember doing an exercise in the room with the team where I would have guys take a sticky note, put their initials on it, and stick it on the part of the wall, the one statement about BHAW that they related to most personally, and said, fellas, you can count on me to lead the team in this action. For example, it could have been the phrase about, supporting another wrestler, about giving praise and taking criticism. I'm going to be the best guy on this team about taking constructive criticism. You can count on me for that. So, at that point, I think there was a lot of detail about BHAW. And even though that part of the wall has been repainted with a scene of the arena where the national championships take place, there's still the vibe. It's still somehow gets transmitted class by class by class. And it's pretty damn hot today.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of pitching it and kind of talking through it with an NFL sports team, if you were going to do that to like, a large, sales organization, and you were going to like be in front of that, how would you like conduct a seminar like that? I'm curious from my end, working in sales and things like that. We have, people come in, and when we have our, large group settings, how do you talk about these kind of team building exercises in that kind of setting?
Well, depending on the size of the crowd, it can very much follow the same pattern that I used with the Army wrestling team. I've done it with rooms full of 50, 60 people. Again, it's a matter of looking inside yourself, deciding what great traits have worked for you, and then deciding what great traits could work for the new team that you're in, and then getting some consensus on that. And then once you get consensus on, I don't know, between 3 and 5, you can't have too many, otherwise it just gets unwieldy. 3, 4, 5 is perfect. Then, you can, if it's a really great group, you might assign one group to come up with specific behaviors, specific indicators that would show that a particular trait is actually happening. And those behaviors become the declaration, the constitution for that particular team. So, a sales force, Brian could absolutely benefit from the same kind of exercise. And if you want me to come work for your company, I'm available for a fee, not a problem. I have seen it done with large organizations. I did it with the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team a couple times. And boy, was that an interesting exercise, because you got half the team that aren't even native English speakers. You got French Canadians, Russians, Swedes, Czechs, Germans, 1 or 2 token Americans, and 8, 9, 10 Anglo Canadians. And so it becomes an interesting cultural exercise too.
Sure. I want to ask a question about just wrestling in general, and in terms of sports psychology. This is going to be the chance for all the wrestlers listening to kind of puff their chest and be like, oh yeah, that's why we do the sport. Is there something particular, you see different kind of articles or things talking about wrestling is the toughest sport, and it translates best to all these other aspects of life, whether it's other sports or whether it's the business world, or in our case, the Army. The number of times that I heard that said was pretty frequent. So is there something particular in your opinion about the sport of wrestling that prepares a young man or a young woman to be particularly successful or resilient or good at whatever field they end up being in?
I think it's the combination of the physical intensity of wrestling and the individual nature of it. It's up to you, okay? You are responsible for what happens out there on the mat. The enemy gets a vote. You got to contend with the enemy, and it's all about you. I really feel that develops. It both requires personal honesty and it develops personal honesty. And that's why it is of such value, pardon the expression, as a character building activity. Okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, football is great. You basically get knocked on your ass every play and you got to get up. Okay? That's a good quality to have.
Sure.
But, the play can run away from you and you can have nothing to do with it. Okay. But there's no running away when you're in that circle. You have to get it done. It's up to you. You are responsible. And so I think that sense of responsibility and that sense of I can do things out there under difficult circumstances, I think that translates way outside of the mat, to the kind of person you are professionally, to the kind of person you are as a role model to your kids, et cetera, et cetera. It just has so many trickle-down effects. And I really like the, old worn-out Dan Gable quote, once you've wrestled, everything else is easy. Mm-hmm. There's some truth to that. I have a great friend who is who I met when he was a former wrestler. I was mentoring him He went to the same high school that I did some 10 years later. I mentored him during his high school career. He went on to wrestle at William and Mary when they were in the EIWA. He was an EIWA champ. He went on to medical school, neurosurgery residence. He's now a world-class neurosurgeon. He comes back to West Point every year.
Yeah, I recall him coming in.
Yeah, Dr. Mark McLaughlin.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
And the last time he was in the wrestling room, a year ago, March, Major John Anderson, one of our ORs, himself a tremendous Army wrestler, tremendous WCAP wrestler. He said that he asked Dr. McLaughlin the question. He says, "What's harder, college wrestling or neurosurgery?" And McLaughlin did not blink. He said, "Oh, are you kidding? Wrestling's much harder." So here's a guy who dissects brains and spinal cords, life-threatening, very important, very delicate work. And that stuff's a piece of cake compared to being a Division I college wrestler. So all you wrestlers out there, yeah, go ahead, pound your chest a little bit. You've earned it.
It's awesome.
So I guess before we wrap things up, we've been on a serious note a lot of this episode. You've been to West Point, this is your 30-year anniversary of being at West Point this year. I'm sure there's got to be a funny story or two from some time, maybe a wrestler in the egg chair, or something you can think of. Me and Willie Simpson, we have, when we created those visualization video recordings that you listen to before matches, we would make jokes about mine because I had a routine of how I prepare my food, and I won't say it on air because it's a little bit the fans don't need to know about that. It's between me and Willie, but it's still an inside joke to this day. I'm sure there's a funny story or two you can share. Let the listeners know. Make sure you name everybody involved in it too.
Funny stories about Army wrestlers. I just think about all the crazy things you guys had to do, to make your weight, to ensure that you were getting extra conditioning. One thing that comes to mind, you mentioned Willie Simpson. There are inspirational stories about all three of the Simpson brothers. I tell one Phil Simpson story in the book that I just finished. There was another Phil Simpson story that I didn't put in. I didn't find a place for it. I'll share it now. It's not necessarily a funny story, but I think it's emblematic of the kind of attitude that champions tend to have, and it's real emblematic of the way Phil Simpson went about his business. The Simpson brothers were recruited out of Nashville, Tennessee. Now, come on, ladies and gentlemen, Nashville, Tennessee is not Western Pennsylvania. It's not Ames, Iowa. Heck, it's not even Long Island or New Jersey in terms of the emphasis on wrestling and the reputation of producing quality high school wrestlers. But Chuck Barbie saw this kid, Phil Simpson, at a camp and said, "I think this guy's kind of special," and talked Phil Simpson into coming to West Point. And Phil told me years later that he had a practice of sneaking through the barracks, getting into the mess hall, up on the poop deck late at night. We're talking like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And he'd bring his earphones and he'd bring his jump rope, and he would jump rope and shadow wrestle in the dark, okay, in this cavernous mess hall, all alone. And then he would shout, "I'm Phil Simpson, national champion," out to nothing, but just to reinforce his conviction about giving everything he had to becoming a champ. I've always that story still gives me a little bit of goosebumps to this day, of a guy being privately arrogant about himself, not being afraid to shout it. It always seems to me like, that's a really great indication of the kind of dedication that, we like to see in great wrestlers. It's maybe not the funniest story, but it's one that
cool,
sticks with me just the same.
That's
I'll
like-
actually tell you a story. This is one of the funnier stories, and it has to do with you, Brian Rowan.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'm not going to, bust him up too much. But this, remember, I did my wrestling in the 60s and 70s, and the sport, dramatically developed through the 80s, through the 90s. And now here I am, it's 2000, 4, 5, 6, something like that. And Brian Rowan is in our conference room in the Center for Enhanced Performance with, I think there are 5 or 6 other guys. And we're all talking about our goals for the upcoming season. I want to be national champ. I want to be national qualifier. I want to be this. I want to be that. And so we get down to like identifying parts of our wrestling skill sets that we, really got to work on and develop in order to have a chance to accomplish that. And at one point, Brian Rowan says, I need to develop quicker funk. and I had never heard that term before. Funk to me was a style of music, and like, what do you mean, quicker funk? What the heck are you talking about? And he went on to explain it to me. And I get it. But I was just so amazed, amused. A guy saying, yeah, I need to develop quicker funk, meaning you had to be more reactive in scramble situations. Yeah, I finally understood, but I had no idea what you were talking about, man. And again, if you use the word funk in conversation with a non-wrestler, they will automatically think it has to do with a style of music. Mm-hmm. Oh, they'll think you're talking about, James Brown or, some soul artist, some funk artist. They'll have no idea that you're talking about the ability to automatically and instantly react in a very complex, uncertain situation and come out on top. So thank you, Brian Rowan, for broadening my vocabulary. There you go.
Bureau is cutting edge with his funk. He's often been called the Ben Askren of Army West Point. So
this is true.
I was thinking when you're telling the Phil Simpson story, I can make it funny. So, it's a cool story, but if we want to make it funny, I think you find a way to get it in the bugle notes and it becomes some cadet folklore. The ghost of Cadet Phil Simpson, right? Screaming the echoes of national champ in the mess hall. You get that put in there. That's good.
Yeah, we could do that. Yes, maybe the ghost of Phil Simpson is lurking in the rafters amongst all those state flags.
There we go. The Tennessee flag, when you see it wind, blowing in the wind. There you go.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to end. Anybody in particular you want to hear on the show? We've done a lot of episodes so far. I know you've listened to a couple, and you may name somebody who's already been on, but anybody you can think of. We've done all the Simpson brothers. Probably should have them all together at some point. But
now that would be a lineup. Let me tell you. Who would I love to see? You mentioned Jimmy Rafferty. Connor Hannafy. See if you can get him.
We got him already.
Okay, you got him, boy. His nickname was bipolar for a good reason. I know you've had I'm thinking about a couple other names right now. I think year by year, groups of captains are really valuable. I think Bobby Heald, who graduated last year, heavyweight, he had been going neck and neck for the starting position at heavyweight all throughout his career. He had a dramatic win at Navy, beating a Navy senior on Navy Senior Day to seal the win, seal the star match win for us over Navy. He finally made it as a national qualifier last year. But he got hit with the COVID bug right before going to the tournament, and he lost the opportunity to compete, for a national championship. And he was just such a classy guy about it. I'd love to see Big Bob on your show.
Yeah, we had him too.
Oh God. So far I'm 0 for 2.
Well, no, you're 2 for 2 actually. So
Yeah.
if you think of it
You
that
got
way.
anybody that's like a mid-90s guy that comes to mind? That we got to get some more folks on there from that time era. Is there anybody that
We haven't
comes to
done
mind?
many from the 90s.
Ryan Seagraves.
He's like one of the only ones we've done from the 90s.
Oh wow. Yeah.
We've
Okay,
done
look,
him. We did Brad Fensky. Is there anybody else from the 90s we've done?
Not that I can recall, no.
We have TJ Wright coming on soon.
Okay.
There's a lot of others in the 90s.
We had a bunch of early 90s guys like Colonel Arredondo and such, but mid to late 90s is a pocket we're trying to find some folks in. So
Okay. I think you've really covered the waterfront pretty well. Right now my 67-year-old brain is blocking on names. If I were at work with my work computer, I could, bring up a whole list of wrestlers that I worked with because I did those goal scripts or those performance imagery scripts with so many guys. But right now I'm not coming up with anything. Again, I'm 67 years old. I need a lot of prompts to help my memory these days.
Well, think it over, and we'll edit it back in before we go live, before we record the episode and put it out there. No, I'm just teasing. No, it's I was just curious. We've done the 71st episode, so there's still a lot of episodes to come, and a lot of people to have on here, but we've knocked out a lot of people so far.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it. Well, fellas, this has been a slice. Thanks for having me on. All I can say is go Army, beat Navy, BHAW forever.
BHAW forever. Hey, Doc, thanks for coming on. Honored to have you on. You've had a significant impact at West Point and specifically on our Army wrestling program, not just with creation of BHAW, but everything you've done for each individual athlete that you worked with. And you're a busy guy. So best of luck with your book. Thank you for spending time with us. And to your point, BHAW forever.
You got it, baby. BHAW forever. Thanks, fellas. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the BHAW Radio Show. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If there's something you'd like to hear on a future show, reach out to us on any of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can reach us at email, bhaw.radio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, go Army, be Navy.